right, next item on our agenda is going to be item number 5, an additional update of our human trafficking and domestic violence roadmap. We ask that this come before us regularly so that we can ensure that the roadmap developed by this council is moving forward in the right direction, and that's exactly what this item is all about, to keep us updated on how things are going and any additional support this council can provide you. Ms. Janovich.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the great strides that the city and the community has made in 2 very important plans within the city of Phoenix. The Domestic Violence Roadmap to Excellence and the Compass Plan, which is combating, preventing, and addressing human trafficking. I have at the table with me today, to my right, Allie Bones, who's the CEO of the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, and also a part of our Domestic Violence Work Group. In addition, to her right is Sarah Suggs, the CEO of O'Connor House, and also the co-chair of the Human Trafficking Task Force. And we have in the room as well, I'd like to acknowledge behind me, many other community partners and city staff that have also made progress in moving these plans forward. Both of the plans, while we know a lot of work has been done in each of these areas, these plans take a very comprehensive approach, and that's apparent through the collaborative and community-wide efforts that we're putting forward in each of the plans. We are also looking at very focused and innovative ways of addressing both human trafficking and domestic violence. And at the end of the day, most importantly, really making that cultural change and shift in our community where we as Phoenix say as a community, domestic violence and human trafficking is no longer acceptable. When we talk about the Roadmap to Excellence plan, there's 5 specific areas that we're working in, from community awareness all the way to partnerships within our community to really end domestic violence. While this particular plan was approved by Mayor and Council last year, I wanted to just quickly go through some specific highlights on what we've accomplished this last year. Last February in 2014, through multiple city departments and community partnerships, we did institute an Order of Protection pilot project. This is where the victim is taken out of harm's way and the orders of protection are served in a coordinated effort between municipal courts and the police department, rather than the victim actually standing on a corner talking about and calling Phoenix PD, identifying where the perpetrator will be in order to serve the order of protection. Through this pilot, we've been able to serve 70 orders successfully and also increase the advocacy services. Right now, we are still in the process of the pilot project. We're continuing to evaluate and look at ways that we can improve that. We're hoping over the next couple of months to issue a report on the successes and how we want to move that pilot forward. Another area that we've been focusing on is our strangulation protocol. And again, this is a partnership between the police department and Maricopa County Attorney's Office, as well as Scottsdale Healthcare Forensic Nurse Examiners. And this is where a procedure was developed to enhance the prosecution of domestic violence through increased evidence collection. Since the inception of this protocol, 590 exams have been conducted. We've seen a 60% increase in case filings, and I think one thing to really acknowledge and recognize is that we've also seen an 85% in the felony level of convictions because of the increased strangulation protocol and the efforts that have come together with our community partners. Also, at your direction, we did allocate funding to the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence for the implementation of a centralized intake line and a housing specialist. As of last fiscal year, they did receive 6,600 calls. 1,600 of those calls were screened for emergency shelter. As a result, and because of the housing specialists, 359 were evaluated, and we were able to place 186 in permanent housing. We also want to acknowledge that we did receive Juvenile Accountability Block Grant funding in the amount of $122,000. That funding is going to be utilized to develop prevention and healthy relationship curriculum, and we will be coordinating with our schools in the Phoenix area to institute that curriculum into the schools to really raise awareness at a much younger age level. Also, we wanted to acknowledge and look within our own city system and take a look at some of our policies and procedures. So through the human resources, we have updated and included more information in our employee manual about domestic violence and appropriate workplace response. We've also added language to our Administrative Regulation 2.3, which is helpful to our supervisors when they're working with individuals within their workplace that may be victims of domestic violence. And of course, we want to acknowledge and highlight our Paint Phoenix Purple 2013 campaign. It was a tremendous success. There were many outreach activities and efforts that took place. Mayor and council participated in public service announcements. We did some activities within our schools. We also had an actual flash mob at Cityscape last year. Again, as a result of all of the community collaborations and efforts, the city was acknowledged and received an award last March at the National League of Cities. So where do we go from here? We are preparing for our Paint Phoenix Purple 2014. We will be kicking that off with the press conference October 2nd with the mayor and council, and again in partnership with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. We are also, in our second year, really focusing our efforts on the business community. We have developed an employer's toolkit that we will be offering to the business community to utilize within their businesses to raise awareness with their own employees. Also, Councilwoman Williams and Councilwoman Pastor participated in a business luncheon yesterday to start the conversation with some of our businesses on how they can get involved this next year in partnering with us and really moving our plan forward. We are also going to be continuing our conversations with our community colleges and universities as well as our local school districts. Grand Canyon University did develop a module last year on domestic violence, and they are requiring that all students and employees view that module, and those are the types of things that we want to continue to have conversations with our other higher education institutions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Allie for brief comments.
Thank you, and I want to thank the mayor and council for your tremendous support of our plan and the efforts that we've been undertaking. It's wonderful to see everyone wearing purple today and your continued support of our efforts to paint Phoenix purple. We've made a lot of progress. There's obviously still more to do, and we know that domestic violence and sexual assault are both being talked about significantly right now, given all of the issues of the day. So we look forward to working with you to paint Phoenix purple again this October. Thank you.
And just to continue with the presentation, to speak briefly on the Phoenix Compass Plan, again, through the leadership of Vice Mayor Waring, who's chairing our Human Trafficking Task Force, there's 4 specific areas that we're working in: victim services, law enforcement, training, and awareness and outreach. Although this plan was just approved in June, there's been great strides that have been made over the summer. Again, just to highlight a few of those examples, we are partnering with O'Connor House to implement SAFE training, which is the Safeguard Adolescents from Exploitation training. This training is really geared towards our hospitality industry and different things to look at when you're talking about individuals that may be trafficked. Also, Vice Mayor Waring did hold a press conference with chiefs of police from area jurisdictions to recognize the implementation of House Bill 2454 on July 24th. And this House bill really enables prosecutors to charge human traffickers with appropriate offenses and sentences when we're talking about this very important issue. We're also partnering, the task force members are providing Operation Blue Wave training, and this is training for law enforcement personnel throughout the valley, and it really offers strategies to disrupt the sex trafficking trade. In addition, our own police department did participate in 2 national enforcement initiatives. The first one was Operation Cross Country, where 41 Johns were arrested and 42 individuals were provided with victim services. The second initiative was Weeks of John, where again 150 arrests were made and 80 vehicles were impounded. We're also partnering with Homeland Security's Blue Campaign. This is a national campaign. A lot of the marketing materials that is being utilized right here locally with our own City of Phoenix emblem, again, to participate and partake in the national campaign as well. I also have sitting behind me Brian Still, who is the Executive Director of Dream Center, and he's really challenged the faith and business community 100 faith communities, and 200 businesses to really drive people to the national hotline. We have already contacted 300 between the two. We have 55% success rate right now, and we'll continue on those efforts of those two areas that have agreed to utilize our marketing materials as well as provide training to the faith communities and businesses. Lastly, I just wanted to acknowledge that at the 29th Annual National Hispanic Women's Corporation Conference, we will be participating in a panel discussion. Vice Mayor Waring will be opening up that session, and we will be participating with federal and state representation to talk about what we're doing here locally to address human trafficking. We are also partnering with the state and the Attorney General's office in support of their public service announcements on Arizona's not buying it. And I did want to acknowledge Kathleen Wynn from the AG's office, who's been instrumental in assisting us with that. And to conclude the presentation, I wanted to just show two quick public service announcements.
It's more real than you know.
It's happening all around us, and Arizona is no exception.
The youngest and most trusting members of our state
are falling victim to sexual exploitation and trafficking.
It's time that criminals who purchase sex from children know that the secret is out.
And Arizona's not going to stand for it.
It just takes ordinary people being informed.
Standing up.
And making a statement.
So when you tell me
You didn't know.
We're not buying it.
Arizona's not buying it.
For more information on how you can make a difference, visit aznotbuyingit.org.
As parents, there are some things we don't even want to imagine.
Like human trafficking of girls and boys as young as age 12.
An estimated 100,000 in the U.S. each year being sold for sex.
It's difficult to talk about, but it's time we all take action.
Because these are precious children, our children.
When it comes to human trafficking of children, we want the world to know.
We're not buying it.
Arizona's not buying it.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah Suggs for a few comments.
Good afternoon, Mayor Stanton, Vice Mayor Waring, and the council. On behalf of O'Connor House and really the entire work group that worked on the Compass Plan, it's a real privilege to be here and report back. It's interesting that we're on the heels of the Super Bowl presentation earlier today, because our preparation is the result of that being a catalyst. I want to also thank all those that have worked diligently, and I want to just say what a testament it is to the city of Phoenix to bring together and assemble such a diverse group of public-private sector, NGOs. In my capacity with O'Connor House, I can tell you I speak to individuals and organizations from across the country, and they tell me, I'm hearing Phoenix, I'm hearing a lot about Phoenix. We're hearing Phoenix is doing things, you're ahead of the game. And I have the privilege to debrief them a little bit about some of the things we are doing to truly create a model city. So thank you for your support, and thank you to everyone who's worked together to collaborate on this.
And that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
All right, I'll turn it over to any questions for the council. First question, though, of course, is as much as we want to raise awareness of these very difficult issues as it relates to domestic violence and human trafficking, wearing purple, doing other things that we can do to help promote it. The truth is that the world is paying attention to what's going on in professional football right now, and the league and how they're responding to these very, very disturbing incidents that have occurred. It's not the first time it's occurred, but the good news is that people are paying very close attention to it, and people's reaction, I think, will be in part based on how strongly the NFL responds with the spotlight on them. Allie, I'm going to turn to you and say, is the coalition working more closely with the NFL and taking advantage of the high profile of the athletes and the team to do a better job of raising awareness of domestic violence and the need to stop it?
Absolutely, yes, Mayor. Thank you for bringing that up. Obviously, the discussion around domestic violence and the public awareness around it has been at a fever pitch these last couple of weeks. And so the coalition has been trying to respond as much we can in terms of providing messages about how it's very important that the NFL take this opportunity to review what they're doing in their policies. We're following the lead in a lot of ways from our national partners. We've got the National Network to End Domestic Violence that's involved with the NFL's efforts, as well as reaching out to those who, the 3 experts that the NFL hired to help them through this process. But absolutely, I think that Sarah brings up a great point in terms of the Super Bowl coming here. We have an opportunity between now and then. We know that, Roger Goodell announced on Friday that they would be announcing their new policies at the Super Bowl. So I think that, again, this issue will be in the spotlight again, and I think we need to be prepared with our own public awareness and how we're going to continue to move this issue forward.
Thank you very much. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I just want to thank the sports team, since we're talking about that, and individuals, the Warners, of course, who I'm sure everybody recognized at home. I'm not sure how the screen shows up on the videotape. But then the leaders of the sports teams here, really appreciate their involvement. Obviously, there has been a lot in the news here in the last couple weeks about sports, but I would want to emphasize, and I've done this before, it's good that we had a catalyst, and it's good that maybe the Super Bowl spurred some interest in the human trafficking subject, but this is a day-to-day activity, which is always just shocking to me. It's not limited to sports fans, football figures, or anything else. I actually think it's sort of unfair to maybe characterize it that way. Really, this is a day-to-day problem that has to be addressed. One thing about the recent events is a lot of this is focused on the kids. If you see a lot of the activities that we were talking about earlier, you know, they're kid-centric. I was a big fan when I was a kid, and as you get older, you get a little more, you know, you got other things going on, you can't pay as much attention to it. But I hope kids are paying attention and how not to treat women or not to treat each other, and just learning some life lessons. You know, 20, 30 years ago, things were accepted, drunk driving, for example, that now really isn't for the most part. And, you know, some of it's tougher laws, like we talked about and celebrated in July, but it's also people have realized the human cost in this, that this isn't fun and games. I think a lot of that starts with educating kids. You know, adults, it's harder to modify behavior. Sometimes you have to have prison sentences or hefty fines or whatever. It is unfortunate and unfathomable to me that we have to go this route in this area. Why you would want to go out and procure a 12-year-old for your enjoyment is just disgusting to me and abhorrent, but obviously people are doing it. I mean, I can't remember, and maybe you guys can, cite the statistics that we had about just how much of a day-to-day activity this is, but I think it would probably shock our audience. Even like I said, I'm older and perhaps slightly more jaded from being inundated with bad statistics in this line of work, but I was just shocked and appalled at the volume of the human trafficking and the amount of just abhorrent behavior that we're seeing as sort of a normal course of people's lives. It's stunning. So hopefully what we do with our task force, and hopefully we do going forward, does not end with the Super Bowl. I've said that before, but I'll certainly be happy to say it again, that we set the standard for the rest of the country and even the world, if we can, and try to make sure that this activity is no longer in any way smiled at, winked at. I think that's the crux of the advertising, that's not acceptable. If you think this somehow is, and you are sadly and badly mistaken, and we're going to make sure you pay a price for it. So going forward, it isn't just about the big game. I know it's been in the news here recently, but I think going forward, we just need to make sure that this just isn't tolerated anywhere at any time. It's still, months after our initial meeting, it's still just stunning to me, you know, some of the statistics that were cited about how common this is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. Councilwoman? Please.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank everybody who's really been involved in this. I give kudos to the Vice Mayor for chairing this committee, because it is a tough subject when you talk about child sex trafficking. But I also want to congratulate you on getting the people involved to raise the awareness. And I think the video says we're not buying it is great, absolutely. It just needs to get out to more and more areas, especially to the young people. I think we need to attract them. I also want to thank you yesterday for setting up the luncheon, and give Sue Glow and Blue Cross Blue Shield a big thank you for hosting it. We are looking for businesses when they stop and think the cost to a business to have domestic violence among their employees. I think they would be surprised at the lost days, the lost revenues, the increased insurance costs. I mean, it continues to add up and up. And when you consider one every 4 women is a victim, 1 in every 10 men, and you look at the employers, that's expensive. And we welcome them to join us. We have all kinds of materials that we would gladly give them that they could distribute, everything from brochures, the little cheat card that you could slip in a shoe and hide, it gives you emergency numbers, to decals, to posters. I'm hoping there will be a couple people that see this on TV that give us a call and want to participate. I know I talked to Warren Fink, who is one of the owners of the Metro Mall. They would like to give you one of those carts that sit in the middle of the mall to display anything you want. They are very, very supportive of this, and they have a lot of traffic going through there, and they said we ought to be able to distribute more materials to them. But I think that's just a drop in the bucket, and as we continue to go forward, I think these are too important to ever neglect. As the Vice Mayor said, I know we put a lot of emphasis on the Super Bowl, but that's just a week out of the year, and this goes on every day, and we can't forget that. So thank you, and thank everyone who's been involved, not only for what you've done in the past, but what I know you're going to do in the future to continue to support us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Other council members? Councilman Zicio, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and I want to thank Councilman Waring, Vice Mayor Waring, you, Mayor, and others on this council. You have a, it doesn't always happen, but you have an incredibly united city supporting your efforts on this. And it really wouldn't have happened if people like Councilman Nowakowski, Felda Williams, Danny Valenzuela, Michael Johnson from last year didn't really drive this issue early on. I mean, they deserve a lot of the credit. Lucia Howard, I see her in the back over there. I mean, there were just, everybody worked together. The coalition that you put together, Sarah, Allie, Deanna, you're an amazing person. I mean, amazing. And I'm glad you got your promotion from the city. You deserve it. We need those we need people like yourself there. But I think that when you bring it back home and when you talk about this, it is something that you cannot believe occurs. When you're talking about selling a 12-year-old girl primarily, or a boy, 12-year-old, a child, what that does to that child, what it does to our society, it is disgusting, as Vice Mayor Waring had said. It's just disgusting to think that this could happen down the street. It could happen in our community. It just, and what it does to that little child as they grow up, that's something that they will never forget. So you've literally ruined a life that we all consider precious. Everybody considers our own personal lives as precious. It's the ruining of that life that has occurred. And I just cannot get over the fact when Councilman Nowakowski primarily brought up the age to me about over a year ago. When you were talking to me, we were talking about sex trafficking. I was thinking, maybe 16, 17. But the idea that a 12-year-old child could be sold is just, it's unfathomable, and it does happen. The question I've got for you, you've got a united council here. What do you want more to accomplish your goals? What do you need? What do you need? Yeah, tell us. Is it money?
It cannot be understated, the importance of the City of Phoenix staff, who are really the glue and the common denominator of both of these initiatives. I can tell you, without question, that they have not only shepherded the entire process, they have kept everyone in contact, communication, coordination. It's been Herculean. So hats off. So when you ask Councilman DeCiccio, and thank you for that question, it really, and part of me wants to say continue what you're doing, but I also think that the public awareness machine that the City of Phoenix is capable of and all of your multiple resources, a lot of times, yes, funding does matter, but really it's the connectivity and that creativity that creates an opportunity to help solve these egregious social problems. Allie?
Yeah, I want to echo Sarah's comments about the staff have been absolutely incredible, and working with them over these last 1.5 to 2 years has been just such a pleasure. I can't stress that enough. But also, one of the things that we have seen with increased awareness comes increased demand for services. We heard with all of the news in the NFL, the National Domestic Violence Hotline has seen an 87% increase in calls over a 10-day period.
That's
alone.
good.
It's wonderful. So, you know, the negative news that's come out has provided the situation where more victims are reaching out for help and are looking for services and support. And so I think we just need to continue to look at what is the demand for services, how are we able to respond to it, and what is the city able to do to make sure that anyone who is seeking support and safety is able to access it.
And for those of you that know me, I'm very action-oriented. I mean, you got to put the list together what you need. We came together, or you came together, and put together a list of pillars. You know, are we on track on those pillars? Are we?
On the domestic violence side, absolutely. We are making great progress on the pillars. As Deanna mentioned, some of the initiatives, but I know I chair the systems reform pillar, and we continue to meet on a monthly basis and make progress on our goals. And so I feel really good about the fact that things are continuing to move forward. The committees are still meeting and making progress. And largely because of the coordination and support from the city, the position that the council created, that Tamara Spindley is in, she's doing a phenomenal job at keeping us all on track and moving forward. So that continued support, the continued support of the centralized screening project, which has really told us so much about what victims of domestic violence in our community are asking for. I mean, Deanna talked about over 6,000 calls answered. And while 1,300 of those were screened into shelter, that doesn't mean that those other over 4,000 weren't given any services. They were all connected with services and support. So that's a huge accomplishment and something that we just need to continue doing.
That has moved pretty well, though, hasn't it, in that respect?
Yeah, absolutely.
So my thing to you then would be, we're on track, we're moving along. I like these feel-good meetings. I think they're fantastic, but there's always something else that needs to be done. If you could start putting together that list of things that you need to have accomplished with a timeline on it, like we'd like to have X, Y, and Z done by this period of time. Lucia in the back understands what I'm talking about. That's the language we like to talk. So if you could put that together, anything else that we might need to get and keep moving this thing, moving it forward, I would appreciate it, and I'd like to see if, Deanna, if you could put something together probably within the next 30 days or so, I'd sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Are any additional comments from members of the council? All right, thank you very much for the outstanding report and update, and we look forward to seeing you again soon, because this is going to be a consistent item before this council. Your professionalism is very, very much appreciated. Next item on the agenda is item number 6, budget update. We had an earlier report by the city manager, but decided to wait until now because you're going to provide a very substantive update. We requested that during the budget year we provide monthly updates on the status of the budget, how revenues are tracking projections, so that we can keep fully informed as we prepare for our budget year next year, or make any decisions that we need to make mid-year in light of the information. Mr. City Manager, please lead discussion.
Thank you, Mayor Stanton, members of the council. While this is not as exciting as a Super Bowl or as impactful to the community as the previous item, this is a critical item to our city organization. And so, as you mentioned last spring during the budget process preparation cycle, I promised you as a council that we would adjust this year's process to be more flexible and responsive to current information. We will bring information earlier and make adjustments sooner to ensure that we aren't surprised by budget numbers. We also committed to more transparency and laying out the information we have used to forecast and make changes. Taking a page from the State Joint Legislative Budget Council, we've included an economic update from Budget and Research in the packet, and it's online as well. And we did this last spring, and it's a practice we intend to continue. And with that in mind, so we're here today to discuss our ending revenue and spending position from last fiscal year, which ended June 30th, the current economic analysis, and how last year's actual results have led us to adjust our revenue predictions for this year. And I would just add that this is the earliest, in my memory, that we have ever done an assessment of this kind with the council. Year-end revenues have moved from being only a forecast now to being an actual figure in August. Now that we have the actual numbers to review in detail and have more information about economic conditions, we can adjust our forecast revenues as we move forward. And on the spending side, I want to thank city staff for following the leadership of the mayor and city council and putting a hard squeeze on spending at the end of the year. You know, monitoring spending is not just a point-in-time effort anymore for us. It is an ongoing, constant effort. For example, last week, we approved a contract that will save us $300,000 on the life insurance that we purchase. That's become a routine for our staff as they seek those opportunities. I want to thank the council and our Innovation Efficiency Task Force members and city staff for that. So we ended last year with $18 million more than we expected because of this real diligent effort, which gives us the resources to be able to come to you today and talk about our revenue forecast without affecting our services. So we'll continue to focus on spending this year, and we'll be back over the next 3 months with the result of a formal process we talked about in the spring that Assistant City Manager Milton Dahoney will be leading. So I also want to thank our budget and research staff who are here, who've been really scrubbing through the data and diving into this information. They do that on a year-round basis. And so Mario Paniagua, our Budget and Research Director, will now walk us through the detail of this report.
Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to start with the results of the 2013-14 fiscal year and present to you how we ended that year in the general fund and how we're prepared for this year that we're just starting. So in 2013-14, we'll talk about on the resources side, which is mostly city revenue. Resources were within $400,000 of our estimate, and on a $1.121 billion estimate, it's 99.96% accurate. So just as a reminder, resources are the beginning balance, all the transfers, the net transfers that come into the general fund for things like things purchased by other funds from the general fund, recovery of unspent commitments of dollars from prior years. That's a very small portion. The biggest portion by far is the revenue, which is sales tax, state shared revenue, and user fees and property tax. And so the revenue was within $1 million of the estimate on a $1.027 billion estimate. So it's very helpful to the city when those projections are able to be realized and very close.
Vice Mayor, you had a question, but although my preference is allow him to move forward. If
No,
it's
no,
an
it's
urgent question,
just a
please.
practical question. So it says revised estimate. Revised when?
This was the revised estimate that was done initially and presented to the council in January of 2014. And so this was the estimate that was brought forward in the trial budget and then this confirmed later in the year. But initially, it was brought to the council in January of 2014.
So half the year was already gone. So you had the actuals for almost half the year.
Yes. That's correct.
So it should be fairly accurate. Do we have how far off it was from the actual estimate, the first estimate?
From the estimate that was done the year before that went into the budget for 2013-14, it was significantly different, and we had presented that to the council and discussed that many times, but it was about $25 million off. Some of that was the result of the reduction of the food tax. Some of that was the change in the state law on commercial rental properties, and then the rest was some economic factors that reduced the sales tax and showed that was less than estimated. But that was about a total of about $25 million.
Thank you.
However, the revised forecast was 99.96% close. And that really does help us moving forward into the 14-15 fiscal year. When we look at the expense side, the spending, as Mr. Zerker mentioned, was $18.8 million below the estimate. And so the vast majority of those came from vacancy savings, but there were other things that were saved. Reduced spending on commodities, supplies, materials, and contracts also was a significant portion of that. The expenditure estimate was about $1,061 million. The spending came in about $1,042 million. What that means is The overall very positive results to the year end for 2014-15, very close on the revenue projections for the revised estimate, and then significantly under on the spending estimate means that we're about $18 million over what was budgeted in the ending fund balance for 2013-14. Those positive results are a huge help to the city as we move forward into 14-15, and so we'll talk about 14-15 now. We talked about the revenue being within 1.1%. However, there are some there's a but to that, which is that some of the actual collections in certain categories did slow down. There's a trend of economic slowing statewide, and it's affected the city as well, which has demonstrated the need to respond quickly and make some adjustments. Just pointing to some external sources, the Greater Phoenix Blue Chip Forecast that presented some information in July, where they talked about the year turning out worse than was expected just a few months ago. So there was some recent economic changes that were recognized there. The University of Arizona Forecast Project is a project that benefits the entire state. We are working with economists that are involved in the state forecasting project led by the University of Arizona to independently review our sales tax projections process and take a look at how we're making those estimates so that we can get some improvement recommendations as we move forward in that entire process. One of the things that they said was that although Arizona continues to grow, it's pretty slow, and they point to some declining jobs and disappointing wage gains, which are affecting the economy. What that means for city sales tax over the last several months, things have slowed down, and this graph is intended to show you if we compare all of 2013-14, and you can see the last 5 months on the right side of that dashed line there, there was a significant slowdown in city sales tax. The last 5 months was 2.7% cumulatively over the same year, over the same period the year before. If you look at 2013-14 overall, the cumulative growth was 3.6%, so a little bit of a drop there. If we specifically break out the retail, you can see the same phenomenon happening. Overall for 13-14, the growth was 5.2%, but over the last 5 months, it was 3.2. In contracting, we've got a lot of volatility from month to month, as you can see. It can be very up or very down or very flat, and you can see all of that in this one window. But there was a period of 3 consecutive months with negative growth. The total cumulative growth rate in 13-14 was 12.9%, which is very robust. However, over the last 5 months, 4.1% is that growth level. The city of Phoenix, as I mentioned, is not alone. It's really something that's happening statewide in terms of economically. The Arizona Republic pointed to consumer spending not having been recovered, and a recovery in jobs is the worst in the country. In fact, we've only recovered in the greater Phoenix area 69% of the jobs that were lost in the recession, and many of those even aren't the same types of jobs, are not the same level of pay. So that's really slowing things down in terms of the economy. The state's Joint Legislative Budget Committee also described a trend of disappointing revenue results over the same period. When we look at the state sales tax that the city receives, you can see a similar trend happening where over the last 5 months there's a decline. So 2013-14 cumulative growth in state sales tax was actually above 7%, 7.3% growth. But over the last 5 months, it was just above 4%. Similar thing was in retail. It was 7.7% growth over the last year, but it was 4.5 in the last 5 months. And contracting, again, we see a similar pattern. It's not quite as volatile as what you saw with the city, but the last 5 months is only 2.7%. As a result, what this means for the city is we've got to respond, and the revenue estimate that was adopted in the budget just a few months ago needs to be revised down to account for the fact of the slow growth over the last couple of months. And so the city, there are 4 main categories that are being adjusted that need to be brought down. city sales tax, the projected growth, is going from 3.1% to 1.7%, which is a reduction of $10.3 million. State sales tax from 6.1% to 4.5%, which is a reduction of $3.8 million. Emergency transportation and vehicle license tax are actually staying the same in terms of a growth percentage at 2.5%. However, because those came in slightly under in 2013-14, we've got to account for that the fact that those are going to be growing off a lower base in 2014-15. And so those are going to come down by, in emergency transportation fees by $900,000, vehicle license taxes by about $500,000, for a total reduction of $15.5 million. Now, pulling it all together, the additional $18 million fund balance provides the resources that the city needs to offset that reduction to revenue. Without impacting any services, the budget is still able to remain balanced in the current year, and in fact, there is a $3 million fund balance left over that will be held in preparation for 2015-16.
So just summarizing, it's really important. We wanted to have responsive early action to information rather than waiting until January or February. We wanted to come now and alert you to where we think we are. That allows us to be better planners this fall and to really continue people's focus on spending. Increasing the transparency by providing more information. As Mario said, we're reducing the revenue estimate by $15.5 million, but that is offset by the savings that were realized by staff last year. And that just means that we got to continue our reducing expenses, continue our focus. The core process that Milton is leading is what we're going to come to you this fall, October, November, December, with any recommendations for continued expenditure reductions there as it becomes balanced. And this just shows the year ahead. Now we've really converted to a year-round budget process. We're on a monthly basis. We have some actions that we need to do or some discussions, and that's shown on the screen there. As we get to next year, when we pick up again in January, the more formal budget process. So with that, Mayor, be happy to answer questions and take comments.
All right, obviously it's not an action item, but at the time to take questions or comments from members of the council, I do have a card as well. I'll start with Councilman Valenzuela.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I appreciate getting this presentation this early into the fiscal year, and I appreciate all the proactive work that the City of Phoenix is doing with the Corps. Mr. Dohoney, I know you're leading that, so I appreciate those efforts moving forward. Of course, additional efforts like the federal grants that the City of Phoenix has been a recipient of in the past, and of course the ones that we are currently competing for, our strategic plan, and of course just the public-private partnerships that we continue to expand. With that said, because we have heard that the City of Phoenix, and we have seen that the City of Phoenix is bringing in a lot of revenue. When you just look at the number, is this the most revenue that the City of Phoenix has collected?
Mayor, Councilman Valenzuela, that is correct. This revenue estimate of even with the reduction that we've talked about, $1.054 billion, would be the highest amount for the general fund. The highest previously was $1.037 billion in fiscal year 2007-2008. One consideration when we look at that is that that's nominal dollars, and so when we take a look at the inflation that's occurred over the years and the purchasing power of those dollars, it's not quite the same as it used to be. And when we've indexed for inflation going back to 2007, 2008, the current revenue estimate is the equivalent of about $50 million less than that. So it's more like $980 million. It's just, but it's only to demonstrate that the purchasing power of that revenue is a lot different than it was 7 years ago. And that's reflected as we have our budget challenges and the expenditure levels that we do have with the revenue that's there.
Mm-hmm. And that was a natural follow-up question that you probably knew where I was going, but why the issues? If we're collecting so much, why are we facing a deficit? But I think you helped explain that a little bit. Do you want to add anything to that, Mario? Because I have another question as well.
I think that's right on. It's just that the expenditures have grown, even though the revenue has grown as well. Revenue has not kept pace completely with the expenditures due to the effects of the recession, and just, you know, we haven't fully recovered from in the economy in the state. We talked about the jobs and the low wages and all those things that are hurting the economy and keeping the revenues down.
Last year's 5-year budget, the forecast showed deficits for fiscal year 14-15 and 15-16, and I appreciate giving us a snapshot of where we currently are. Where are we? I mean, if we were able to get a snapshot of a 5-year budget forecast, do you have anything to offer right now for the? I mean, you've offered some for 14-15. What about looking even further ahead in 15-16?
Mayor, Councilman Valenzuela, you know, the 5-year forecast is a really important tool that we use, and last year it helped guide the decision-making of the council as we found ways to balance the budget and actually plan ahead. So it was critical to us to be able to forecast ahead, and so that's one of the reasons why having a 2-year concession plan and employee contracts was important, because that second year is going to play into what we do for next year. So again, we know based on the 5-year forecast that we need to be careful again this year as we move to the 15-16 process. We don't know yet on expenditures for the year, because we're going to start in about a month. Mario's staff is going to go through line by line, department by department on individual expenditures, and that's why we come back in January with a more clear picture of the spending. But what this does right now in the fall is it gives us a better picture on revenues that we know we have to work towards. And so that's really, that 5-year forecast becomes a longer range planning tool that we can use effectively, and I think we've started that.
I think, I mean, it's obvious that the work is being put in now from the strategic plan, the core plan, as I mentioned. We're staying diligent and you know, trying to, we are competing for federal funding. We've been fortunate to get a lot of funds that way. Of course, we should continue to look at other public-private partnerships like the one that I think we're fortunate, you know, to be working on, the golf course there in Maryville, working on a public-private partnership that will save the city hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, working that out with Grand Canyon University. But I know that there are other partnerships, so you know, that would be good for everyone. So I appreciate the information.
Thank you very much, Councilman Valenzuela. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. First, to the point that this is our highest level of revenue, and to talk about inflation, but our biggest costs, are they not, our personnel. So we have a lot fewer personnel than we had in 2007, 2008. I would say the number of personnel dropped as a bigger percentage than inflation rose. This isn't the late 70s or early 80s. We're not having dramatic rises in inflation. So we're still spending, I would gather, a lot more because of pension costs and salary increases and so forth, more per employee than we were paying before. And so we're not having savings that I think would be reflected normally in a city that's gotten more revenue than it's ever had before. I mean, this is our record. So just a point about that. The trend here is not our friend. We're 2.5 months into this fiscal year, and we're already talking about being down $15.5 million. I mean, it's great that we have the leftover from last year, but obviously if this goes even another $3 million, then we're in a deficit spending situation again, potentially. That's certainly troublesome, to say the least. I am curious, I think it might have been a Dustin Gardner article that was in the Republic. I think it had the $15.5 million figure, but I thought it was a range. It was like $15.5 million, at least that's what I remember from the article. I could be wrong. He's sitting there, maybe we could ask him. I thought what was reported was 15.5 to like 55 million. Why would that be, or do you know what I'm referencing? You're nodding, so apparently you do.
Mayor, Vice Mayor Waring, I think you're referring to a range that came from the 5-year forecast about future projected deficits. And
it wasn't just
I
for this
think
year.
it was in something in that range when we came last January and talked about the future 5 years. That was a range that was projected at that time if we didn't do anything. And so now this is the first step in doing actually it's the second or third step, because we did something last year with the labor contracts in doing something about that 5-year forecast. So I think that was a deficit projection rather than a revenue projection.
So where will we be going forward for, say, next year's budget, assuming we get through this year? Now we're building off the base that was established this year. What's it looking like for next year? You've got extra data now since the last time we discussed it, so, I mean, just a guess.
Mr. Manager?
Yeah, I don't know we can forecast that far ahead, Mario. I don't know if you guys have looked that far ahead to 15, 16.
Well, I mean, we've got
on the revenue
5-year
side.
forecasts, so we're trying to forecast that far ahead. I'm not saying we're doing it accurately. We know from experience we're not doing it accurately. Nobody is, apparently, but,
I think what we'd say generally is that 5-year forecast showed that it had the 3 years, the first 3 years were potential deficits. And so we have to continue to do what we're doing now, which is review our revenue estimates carefully each month and continue to focus on expenditures and find ways to reduce those expenditures. Before we get to a January or a February, we have to be doing that all the way along. And so that's what we're talking about.
you have something to add, Mario?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what you said, Ed, about the forecast being a very effective planning tool, and giving us what we needed, the knowledge that we needed to take action very early on to prepare in advance for 2015-16. And that's we're continuing to work on that now with all of the city departments, and the things that the city managers put in place are working us toward that goal. And so, we are developing the revenue estimates, and then we're going to bring back the forecast updated early in 2015. And so as we prepare that, we're also going to be looking at all of the expenditures very, very closely, and seeing what we can do to drive costs down even further in anticipation of the challenges that we saw ahead. So just another point and reiteration that forecast has been a very, very effective tool for this council and for this city.
But we're getting these reports every month. Is that correct? I mean, we keep talking about January, but that's not the next time we're going to hear.
Yes, the
where we
idea is
stand.
that our budget director will have the pleasure of appearing before this
Yes,
council
I'm sure
monthly.
he's looking forward to it every time.
For the foreseeable future, so we get very detailed reports and opportunity for this council to ask questions and to be as transparent as possible. So yes, he gets, and if we need to do it more, we'll do it more, but at least monthly, our budget director will have the opportunity to appear before the councils to answer any questions and to prepare this detailed information.
But just in the interest of looking towards next year, it just doesn't appear to me, looking at these numbers, like we have a lot of wiggle room.
No,
Is that a fair?
That's fair. It's been that way for the last 6 years, and yeah, this year is the same, where we have to be really conscious of everything we spend as staff, and that's why these processes we're talking about are so important here.
And you and I have talked several times about what's going on at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to do a little better than the rest of the state as a whole, seem to be a little more solid. But seeing how their trend, you had a couple quotes from the paper in there about that, but there's no indication things could get worse, that it's going to ramp up. You think kind of this is where we're at, we'll probably break even this year, and then we'll start worrying about next year, next spring?
Well, it's always, I don't want to worry about next year, next spring. I'm worrying about next year now, and that's why we're here. But, it's hard to say that
We're
there's a
also worried
trend.
about this year
I
right
know.
now, too. Yeah, so.
It's hard to say that 1 month makes a trend, but I think if Mario would flip back to these, where it shows. So August, I think, really validated the forecast that they were developing from the July previous numbers. So that 2.7% over that 5-month period is consistent with what the forecast is. And I'm glad you brought up the state, because the state does a forecast every month, the JLBC, and you're familiar with that from your time there. And the latest JLBC report is projecting, I want to say it's something like a $270 million deficit in the state budget as they sit now. And so what happens at the state is what happens here. They come in and they work at it. And that's what we're going to have to do as we monitor this. But I think the point I want to make is that we're starting this earlier than we ever have, because that's exactly what the mayor and the council, you told us to do last spring, is don't wait to come to us in January with this news. Come to us now.
No, I think this is great. I'm looking forward to the next one. You guys probably aren't, but I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, previously we did get monthly budget reports, but they'd be in our packet and they wouldn't be nearly as detailed as provided now. And also, we're asking our budget department to be more proactive about making the necessary adjustments. Obviously, we need to make mid-year decisions. We'll make mid-year decisions if we're in that position. In addition, in the very near future, our assistant city manager will be presenting the results of his work and analysis about organizational review. And I think all of us are looking forward to that and the actions that may need to be taken from that. Councilman Williams, did you have something?
Ed, I'm concerned because you're saying we need to reduce now. We know the projection was too high, and that you are monitoring and you're going to come back in January. And to me, that's too long a time to wait. I question, how do you expect departments to deal with this? Are you going to tell them that they need to reduce now, and how do they prioritize?
Yeah, thank you. Let me clarify. It's not that we're not going to be doing anything until January. What I'm referring to in January is that preliminary budget status where we will have the formal projections for 15-16. But as the mayor mentioned, we're going to be reviewing these numbers every month on those bar charts to see how we're doing. In terms of spending with departments, the departments have been focused on this now for a year about watching their expenditures. We're very tight on filling vacancies. We need to hire some people, but we're very tight on vacancies because the vice mayor pointed out personnel costs are where our greatest costs lie. So Milton reviews every request to fill a position from departments so that we're sure that when we're filling a position, it's absolutely critical because we have to watch those expenditures every one that we do. And Mario's staff does the same with departments. So everybody's tuned into this. And next month, they're going to start the normal cycle of reviewing expenditures after 3 months to project for the year and making those adjustments. Mario, anything to add?
No, and thank you, Ed. No, it's a good description, and we're just going to be digging into, we do watch those expenditures every month as it is, but after 3 months, we do what we call a technical review, and we meet with departments and we dig into every single line item of their budgets and watch that very closely and make the projections for the rest of the year. And that's when we also develop our estimates for 2015-16. And so it's a process that does take several months. But in the meantime, as mentioned, we're going to be updating you with any information that we have available to provide.
Other than personnel on the priority list, what would be your second item, second priority?
Well, my second priority is healthcare. So we've started, healthcare is a big driver of costs and it does exceed inflation. And so I've started with our employee labor groups the conversation about working on, are there alternative ways to have healthcare in the city for our employees that maintains the quality that we want and expect and need for employees and their families, but can we do it at a lower cost? And so I have Mary Kyle in our Human Resources Department is leading that effort that we're going to do with employee groups to review that because I think there's some real opportunities for savings in healthcare. So I would say that is the second priority in terms of the big items that we can deal with.
Mayor? Other members of the council? Councilwoman Gallego?
I think we also need to be cognizant that we have some areas where we may need additional expenditures. So we've had roads literally collapse and areas that have flooded more than once. And we are going to be needing to do some infrastructure investments in this budget. So just want to make sure that is very much on everyone's top of mind, that we need to keep our citizens safe and able to get to work.
Thank you very much. Councilor Nowakowski.
First of all, Ed, I want to thank you. I mean, it's something that's really needed. We need to start managing by results, and I just want to thank you for bringing this report so early in the year. I was noticing that last summer, we were looking at July. It seemed like July was doing pretty good last year compared to this year. Were you looking, is there any special events, or what's the explanation? Are you looking at it in detail to kind of figure out what was going on last year during July compared to this year during July?
So from what we've reviewed, there really wasn't any significant special events that were a major difference. It's really the economic trend that we saw, that the state saw, consumer spending down overall as a result, and we saw that happening here. Saw it playing out in the city sales tax numbers. When you look at the city sales tax, when you look at retail, you can just see that spending down. And also the contracting, that was another one where there's a significant change from one year to the next, and that, you know, there have been issues with the housing building and housing permits and the housing market, and so generally construction, we see that result here in the contracting category.
You know, we're in September now. We're looking at numbers back in July, and now we're looking at expenditures of $18 million that we didn't know of, and just incorrect budget estimates that we had. Do we have a better system, or is there some way to keep us accountable so we are managing by the results of our revenues that we're collecting, and at the same time, how are we holding our managers accountable to these forecasts and our budgets? You know, are we adjusting the budget? I know that you just adjusted it, but have we looked at August, and has August trending the same way, or is it trending down, or is there another adjustment that we're going to have to do next month?
Mrs. Zerker?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, Councilman Nowakowski. So in terms of spending, every department head is accountable for their budget, and they are graded and scored in our performance review on their performance in the budget. And so it was good news this year that our department heads cumulatively brought the city in $18.5 million under budget. So that happened little by little, each department by each department. So they would be scored and graded on how their individual department did. As a whole, we came in $18.8 million under, which was very good news. On the revenue side, I'll ask Mario to talk a little bit about how August, that's a good question about how August, what does that do to the forecast in terms of validating it or changing it?
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman Nowakowski. So when we look at August, you can see an obvious uptick, which is that fifth month, kind of a jump there in overall sales tax, a little bit in retail, a little bit quite significant in contracting, which, as we talked about, can be volatile. When we look closely at that, it actually validates our estimate, because it's not as though we don't project that there's going to be some growth continue. We do assume that there's going to continue to be economic growth. It's just going to be at a very slow level, as it has been. And overall, cumulatively, that level in August actually validates the numbers that we're talking about now, over the reduction of $15.5 million overall.
So Mario, just for those individuals watching over the television, so you go out there and you buy a pair of pants, right? So you actually pay taxes. So when do we find out how much tax revenue we receive for the month of August, let's say?
So, Councilman Nowakowski, great question. So if the taxes or if it's on an item spent in the month of August, the city would collect that in the month of September throughout that entire month, and then it would be reported to us during the month of October. So it's actually a delay of a couple of months.
So we're looking at about 60 days?
Approximately, yes.
Thank you very much, Councilman. I'll hand over to Councilman Gates in just a moment. I just want to make sure something is clear for the folks watching. At this time, you're not making any recommendation for mid-year changes to our budget itself, not forecast, but for the budget itself. No mid-year cuts?
Mayor, that's correct. We are not making any recommendations to change the budget overall.
And through Councilman Williams' committee and ultimately through this council, we approved a 5-year infrastructure plan, a 5-year CIP plan. At this time, are you making any proposed changes to our infrastructure plan for the city?
No, we are not. But I would say we are reviewing, we always want to be reviewing the CIP in the same way, because that is also a flexible document. And so in fact, Milton just brought a best practice to my attention from his past work about a CIP, internal CIP committee that we're going to be working on to really dig in and make sure that we're fully coordinated on our CIP and we are able to respond quickly to events like we had this spring, or I'm sorry, this summer.
Thank you very much. Councilman Gates?
Thank you, Mayor. Just echo what many of my colleagues have said. Really appreciate that we're having this discussion now, not having it, right at budget time saying, where did this $38 million deficit come from? So I just want to thank you for that. Also, I like some of the savings discussions that you had, but again, we're going to be looking for more coming through the efficiency subcommittee. I know we had a warranty item last month, and I know that there are others in the pipeline to bolster this. Now, one question I had, you said, and thank you, due to your tight spending controls that you put in place in the last fiscal year, it led to about 18 million more in the fund balance than you had anticipated. Do you have some sort of a goal that you would like to achieve for this fiscal year, a target through the use of that same tight spending approach?
I guess I'd say overall my goal is not to spend any more than we have to. I think generally speaking, you want your budgeting to be about where you come in, maybe within 1%, but we have to departments have to respond to the circumstances in front of them. And so what we saw at the end of the year was the beginning of some slowing, and so that's why we really put the brakes on quick instead of just going along. So I don't know that I have a specific goal for it, other than that people are ready to jump in and respond to immediate information. Mario? Okay.
And no, I appreciate that answer. The other thing that I like that you said earlier is that this is, I think there was a question about, boy, you're having to watch everything now. You said this is how it's been for 6 years. And I appreciate basically that realization that this is the new normal. This is something that I think all of us have been concerned that folks would lose the focus on the fact that we have to watch every dollar, the way that it's spent, and I appreciate you maintaining that focus. And like I said, coming back here so quickly, and we're just going to have to monitor this very closely because it's just unacceptable to get back to where we were last year. That can't happen again, and I know you're committed to that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman DeCiccio, and then Vice Mayor.
Oh, thank you. Well, and just as a follow-up on a couple things. One, I think it's fantastic. I think it's really cool you guys are coming to us every month. I think that's fantastic. It allows us to be able to see and monitor as well what's going on with staff and what's going on in our city. Just as a response as to what the new normal is, if you look at the new normal, there's been increasing revenue every single year in the city of Phoenix. So the city of Phoenix has been growing. The economy has been growing. The problem is that the expenses have been outpacing the growth rate in the revenue. And that's where the adjustment really needs to take place. And I'm glad to hear staff talk about looking at the expense side. Because if you look at what's occurred in the past, everything's been about raising revenues, raising fees, finding ways to take more money out of hardworking taxpayer dollars out of their pocketbook. But now the focus is going to be on expenses. I'm going to get a series of questions here, and I won't even get into the fact that the city of Phoenix has now more revenue in its history this year, more revenue. And to follow up with Councilman Waring's comments about employees, in 2007, we were right around 17,000 employees. Today, we're at 14,000 employees. 14,000, a drop of about 3,000 employees, but expenses are higher. You cannot blame inflation on that. You just can't do that when you're down 3,000 employees that represent, what, maybe $300 million to the city of Phoenix. So it's more than just that. It literally is more than that. You can't blame that, and that's not a fair thing to say. When you look at what happened at the state just had their readjustment. They went down approximately, they dropped their revenue report, the joint legislative budget dropped at about 3.5% on their projections. We dropped ours 1.4%. They had mentioned that the sales tax was down in the state from 2.6% from their projections. License fees, permits were down approximately 13%. Do you think that the reduction that the city of Phoenix did at the 1.4%, is that enough?
Mayor, Councilman DeCiccio, yes, based on the trend that we've seen and the economic information that we have, as I mentioned, we see this slight uptick in this the most recent month, which overall places us at the level that we're projecting for the rest of the year. So yes, we believe that at this time, which could change, and we recognize that there are always things that could change in the economy, particularly when we're talking about sales tax, which is a very volatile source of revenue. It can change very, very quickly. But at this time, yes, we believe our projections are where they need to be for the rest of this fiscal year.
Well, overall, though, Mario, sales tax has been a pretty stable tax. It's always been between 42–44% of our budget, hasn't it? It doesn't change that much.
In terms of a percentage of the budget, since it's such a big portion of the revenue that we have, that piece is going to stay the same because as the sales tax comes down, all of the other revenue, the total revenue amount comes down as well. But in terms of an amount, it can be a very volatile source and change with the whims of the economy.
Consumer confidence, basically. When you lose consumer confidence, they quit buying, especially durable goods. So let me get into a couple of questions here. The City of Phoenix, we made a promise to the public we're going to be looking at hiring 300 more officers, approximately 100 new officers by the end of next year. Was that correct? Am I right on those numbers?
Mayor, Councilman DeCiccio, yes. The public safety plan, which is primarily funded from sales tax dollars that are dedicated exclusively to public safety. We're coming up on the final year of the balancing plan to bring those back into level funding. And earlier this year, we had talked about being able to start in March with a hiring plan to begin resuming hiring officers at that level, at that rate.
If I remember correctly, it was 100 new officers by the end of next year, 2015. Am I correct on that?
That sounds close. I'm not sure if that's exactly the number. Does that sound right? Okay.
Can I see the plan in writing somewhere to show
Sure.
how we're going to do that and how that's going to be put
Yep.
into the next year's budget as well? The question of healthcare costs are intriguing. I've asked staff, and Mary Kyle, I guess, put together something, but I want to get something a little bit more detailed. This access of to care, the national law, what kind of impact that's going to have in 2017, I believe, is when that's going to have the full
2018
impact.
right
Or
now.
2018, it moved back another year. What is that going to do to our budget? And what is that, I mean, in simple layman terms, how will it increase it? Will it increase it? What does that do with our healthcare budget? I'd like us to, if you could put something together on that,
Okay.
and something that the common person can understand. The other is, what is our expected pension costs increase? Not overall pension, but what is our, this year was approximately $18 million. What are we projecting to have over and above that $18 million, over and above in this next budget coming up?
Anything yet? No. Yeah, we get a report from the state for the public safety pension and from COPERS, the City of Phoenix pension. We get a report from their actuaries telling us what the rates will be for next year in November. So at this point, we don't know. We don't really know how to project that because there's lots of factors going into it. The amazing stock market returns last year. There's also new accounting rules that play into it, several things like that. So I don't think we know at this point what to project for next year's pension, which is one of the reasons why, this is a deliberative process, because we have to wait for some information to come to us.
Well, the economy and the stock market's at the highest level ever. I mean, if you look at the stock market, it's been at the highest level.
So that's a hopeful sign for what might happen with pensions next year, but we just don't know until the actuaries do their work.
Well, it's also a hopeful sign for our city. We got a growing economy. The other is, when you look at the pension costs, there was a budgeted number, I believe, that you've put out in January. I think that was around $18 to $20 million in addition for this year. Just what we had estimated back in January. Was that approximately right? Over and above, extra costs.
Councilman DeCiccio, $18 million was the projected increase in pension costs in the general fund in 2014-15. So your memory is correct, yes.
Okay,
So
thank
13 million of that was public safety and 5 million was civilian. That's what made up the 18.
It's an increase. The strategic plan that Mr. Mahoney's putting together, thank you for doing that. I think there were a few of us that were looking at it. When will you be able to give us a outline of what you're doing so that we know what the focus is? And that something that you may be able to come to council and show us what you're focused on. Because when you're talking about strategic planning, you'll have 9 different ideas up here. But at some point, you'll be able to mesh it together. Are we planning a council meeting where you're going to be able to bring that forward?
Mayor and Councilman DeCiccio, we are scheduled to come for the October 21st policy meeting with Mr. Dahoney's first report.
With a schematic and a outline. In your report, are you looking at raising revenues and fees in some of the other departments? Is that also going to be part of that report?
Mayor, Councilmember DeCiccio, that's really not the focus of it.
Well, I mean, is it going to be part of it then? I'm sorry.
I don't anticipate that, no, sir.
Okay, so we won't be looking at extra fees and raising taxes, and that's good.
This
I'm glad that
particular
that's-
tool is not meant to do that.
Perfect. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that because I think that's critical. If you look at really, we do have the most revenue, but if you start looking at the expense side, what I call the wasteful, government, not government waste, but if you look at cutting waste and things which basically some of us would call efficiencies, that is the real focus. And then at the same time, grow your economy, which we can do. I mean, we're already seeing a growing economy, and we've got the city and Ed and many members of this council here have really put some really good things in place to help grow the economy. We just need to grow a little faster. The other question, well, actually the other concern that I had that I wasn't expecting out of this meeting was the comment, there will be no improvement to our infrastructure plan. Why? I mean, unless I didn't hear it correctly.
I'm not
There's
sure the
no-
context.
on the
Maybe I
5-year?
said that. I'm not sure the context of that.
No more money's going toward infrastructure?
I think you said you hadn't made any, you were studying, but you hadn't made any recommendations yet.
Right, the
But we're
CIP,
looking.
the CIP is on a similar sort of schedule as our budget, which is this year we have a CIP budget, a capital improvement budget in place, and departments are now working towards what resources are available for capital improvements for next year. But that doesn't mean that we're not, within the year, as issues come up, that we don't, within different capital budgets, maybe, rearrange some of the spending to meet immediate needs. But overall, the capital improvement budget for next year is beginning to be under development also.
Well, that is Councilman Waring and I put together a letter we sent to the mayor, hoping to have a council meeting on infrastructure. And we've had this debate before, the amount of monies that have been taken away from the infrastructure dollars, the secondary financing, and put into the primary, which is operational, has been quite a bit. With the growing economy and having the most amount of money we've ever had in the city history, it's time now to start looking at improving our infrastructure. If we don't do that, Ed, we're going to be looking at some of these East Coast cities. I mean, when the potholes, it's just like packaging. It's no different than that. When a person comes into the city of Phoenix, they see a pothole, they see deteriorated streets, they are going to naturally think this may not be the place I want to invest for my new company to hire more people. I may not want to move there. So the need for infrastructure is critical, and I'm waiting for that to happen. I'm hoping that the mayor responds to that and moves us forward on it. And then my final question here deals with, because I do actually like budgeting issues. The budget indicates that there's a higher ending balance in 2013-14 due to reduced spending, but a lot of this is, and we mentioned it earlier, with the reduction in vacancies. Has there been given any thought of just basically any vacancy that's been that's been open for 6 months? If it has to be reviewed by Mr. Dahoney, why not just cut those vacancies, take it out of the budget? That way it creates more transparency. And if we are going to be looking at funding more police, that might be the best place to do that. So instead of hiring them and prioritizing them in certain areas, we've already made a decision we want more police. Why not move it into that?
So Mayor, Councilman DeCiccio, thank you for bringing up that point. Because that is a part of what the core program was doing, that Milton is leading, was also a thorough assessment of the vacancies in the city. So that is actually part of this work. Now, we think it's probably going to be sort of a 2-month, an October and November report, because Milton can't solve every problem in the world in one shot.
Sure he is, that's why we
He'll
hired
come
him.
close. But the vacancy assessment is really a part of what the core process is. And in terms of hiring police officers, this really comes down to choices of that. If we want to do infrastructure and hire police officers and do other things, then you have to make choices about what you're already spending on or find new sources of revenue. So you've got to make choices among the resources you have for the spending you want to do.
Well, I agree, and I have no problem making those decisions on that. I mean, my focus has been hiring police and bringing in infrastructure. We can have that debate up here once we see the list of prioritization that Mr. Mahoney's working on, ranking functions of government from top, the most important function to the least important. Then we can start making a decision. Are these bottom 10%, is that really a function that we need to be doing in government? So that ranking that he's going to be moving forward on, the prioritization part, is going to be critical for this council to be able to make decisions on where we ought to be spending our dollars.
I want to be clear that we're not coming with a ranking.
What are you doing then? I didn't know
We're
that.
assessing each department's operations and making an assessment of where there are opportunities for efficiencies, where there are opportunities where vacancies, as you mentioned, are no longer necessary, and those sorts of things. But this is not a ranking.
Well, why aren't you doing that? If you think about it, we've got $1.054 billion we're going to be doing in the general fund. It seems to me like it's a very logical move to say, here are all the functions of government. Council, what do you think is important? And then we can debate it up here, and it's transparent that way to the taxpayers. If you're not doing that, I would strongly recommend you move in that direction, because that is what a strategic plan does. It allows you to prioritize your functions. Thanks, Mr. Vice
All right,
Mayor.
thank you. All right, seeing no further discussion, I'm going to call on myself. So, and follow up on a point I made earlier, and I think Mayor Stanton alluded to. So he talked about how you're not talking about cutting the budget we're in right now or cutting any services and so forth. However, would it be a fair statement to say that if we go over the, I think it was $3.7 million left in our wiggle room, a term of art I used before, so I'm curious if the 15.5 million swells to 20 million, so increases or decreases, however you look at it, by another 4.5 million, what then? At what point do we actually have to start going back and saying, oh, we just can't, I know we said we were going to do that, we just can't do it anymore, and we're going to have to cut it? At what point do you come to us with that news?
Vice Mayor, that's a great question. So when we're looking at the current year.
I'm glad you liked that. That's very nice.
But that's exactly where the spending reductions in the current year would come in. So we talked about what we were able to save last year with the $18 million. But we're digging in again this year to see what can we reduce this year. What spending savings might we be able to achieve in the current year. So if there were a need to go further than that $3 million to balance the current year, that would be definitely the first place we'd look, is the spending, any spending reductions we can get in 2014-15 that we haven't already identified. So that would be the first place. And then obviously, if there was a huge tanking in the economy and a huge decline in revenue that was so significant that it required us to go much further, when we would certainly be speaking with the City Council about any actions that we might need to take to respond to that.
Well,
and
and
so
if
just
there's
to
a huge,
amplify
if
that,
there's a huge, incident or something happens and we have a big drop like 2007, 2008, people understand, they may not like, but they understand cuts in that scenario. What they probably don't understand is why we'd have to be cutting now. We actually have slow, not what we'd like to see, but growth. Councilman DeCiccio mentioned our budgets have gone up year after year, so more or less the last few years.
We don't need to cut now, but you mentioned it.
But we're not far away from that point either.
But you mentioned, some members of the council were here when we did have to do mid-year cuts, when we had a dramatic economic incident in 2008, 2009, 2010. We actually did do mid-year cuts at that point because of that dramatic
Happened at the
shock.
state as well.
Right. But at this point, we are not in a place where we are contemplating that.
But it wouldn't take a dramatic event to get us to that point either. At this point, I mean, if we start ticking above, $20 million, then we don't have the resources at the moment. So I think what you're telling me is you're continuing to go and evaluate our operations, finding places you can cut to expand that flexibility or wiggle room, as I called it before, so that we have, if something happens and things slow a little bit more, we can survive. If it's a big thing, then we're gonna have to cut. I mean, we just don't have anything in reserve, really.
Vice Mayor, you identified it very well. We will continue to look so that we continue to have flexibility to deal with whatever comes. Yes.
Thank you. Any further comments? We have one card, Greta Rogers. Sure.
Thank you. Vice Mayor and members of the council and people in attendance, my name is Greta Rogers. I have the packet, or at least part of it, that you guys have. So I've been able to read it and the tables and gain an understanding of where we are today. And this is revenue, and the budget has been near and dear to my heart since we hit the skids in '08 in serious $700 million shortfall, which was 23% of our budget, and worked with other people and management and staff to get us to parity. So I'm not going to go away. I don't think you can look forward to that anytime soon. The tables shown reflect decrease in city sales and tax revenue, and a steady decline from 414 through 714. But this also is in line with the economy of this state, which among the 50 is at number 49, exceeded only by Nevada for slower growth in the economy. And so don't expect miracles when that's where we stand nationally. We also, last month, and this was in the paper last week, we are now at 7.1% unemployment rate. We increased by 0.2% the number of people unemployed. That's fewer people buying. So we have a structural situation that is statewide and local. The city must allocate dollars from the general fund to essentials, and that word is in capital letters, essentials, which in order are salaries, pension obligations, which are contractual. 2, public safety. You're talking about 300 more policemen, fires down about 140. From the time a man or a woman is accepted
Ms. Rogers,
for training.
The buzzer went off. If you could wrap up.
I've sat here for 3 hours. For training, it's 12 months before they can go to work. So keep that in mind too. Street transportation and public works, that's infrastructure. And it was spoken about here today. It is in dreadful need of attention, and money has to be allocated for it. In conjunction with street transportation and public works, this must be funded. Our streets are going to, excuse me, hell in a handbasket. From Northern to Baseline and 64th to 59th, east to west. That's the core of the city. So I'm grateful to you for bringing this to us today and for changing the plan from the way it always had been. Oh, it's January and the snow's falling. Not here, but elsewhere. And we have to talk about the budget. Woo-dee-doo. No, this is the way we must do it and continue to do it monthly and annually with no exceptions. So people understand, and so that these people who are our representatives understand and can make considerate decisions. Thank you, and thank you for giving me a little extra time.
All right, any further business? Ed? Nope, nothing for the good of the order? Everybody's good? Do you guys want to do your personal points? Yes, go ahead.
Do one very quick
Yeah.
one. I will save most of mine for later, but
Okay.
We have obviously had a lot of challenges in District 8 with flooding and storms, and I owe thank you to almost everyone in this room, but wanted to take this time to recognize Ray Dovalina for his help. I had many days where I was texting him at midnight, and then the next text was earlier than I would like to admit, so I don't think we gave you any time to sleep, and just wanted to say thank you for going to a lot of community meetings and answering a lot of questions, and let you know that we do really appreciate your service to District 8. So this is my very first Friends of District 8 award, and I wanted to say thank you.
All right. Woo!
And offline, I'm sure she'll give us the list of people who she doesn't wish to thank who are in the room. She alluded to that as well.
Vice Mayor, real quick.
Yes.
I have an intern that's here, Stephanie. Could you please stand up and be recognized? She's an intern from ASU that's helping out in District 7. I want to just thank Stephanie for all her help and everything she's doing out there in District 7. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Stephanie, hopefully this career detour with Councilman Nowakowski will not limit you in any way going forward in life.
She's
Yes.
grown.
I just want to mention that this Friday is the District 1 breakfast at the Deer Valley Airport, 7:30 a.m., and we are going to be acknowledging Judy Lorch's great service because she is retiring as of this Friday. So I welcome everybody to come and wish her well on her new endeavors.
Thank you.
You still have that prime rib dinner out there?
Not at breakfast, great eggs though.
Well, Vice Mayor, just on the council request, there are a couple things I wanted to make sure I got on the record and got staff working on. One, the City of Flagstaff did this Better Bucks, dealing with the homeless issue. Fantastic idea. I'd love to have staff research that and see what we can do and implement something like that, similar to, with these panhandlers on the streets, giving them bucks. It also helps a lot of our nonprofits. I'd really like us to take a look on that, and if they could work closely with my staff, that'd be great. Two, I was just in Washington, D.C. on some of the Bureau of Indian Affairs issues that came up with the Tohono O'odham Nation. The federal government ruled and cut in testimony, it's important for this council to know, they ruled in testimony that the TO, the Tohono O'odham Nation, can build in 3 to 4 casinos in any unincorporated piece of property, Maricopa County, Pinal, or Pima, which means they can take up any property in Phoenix that's unincorporated, that's part of the county, and build a casino without any zoning restrictions. I'd love for you to verify this, work with some of the congressional offices, find out exactly, get a copy of that testimony. I think it's critical. I heard it. And find out what the city of Phoenix is going to do. The city of Mesa has embarked on, and I believe Chandler too, finding out where all their unincorporated pieces of property are. That's how serious those cities have taken it. So it's real important that this city, it's not a tribe-on-tribe issue. It is not a Glendale versus, well, it was Glendale versus tribal government. It is literally an issue that's going to have a big impact in our city, that could have. And then third, when we're talking about growing our economy, I'd like to have staff look at self-certification for solar entities. When they put those projects on solar rooftops, right now they have to go through an extensive planning process. What can we do to help speed that up for the solar industry? Thanks, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Nope, this has been fun. We should do it more often. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Meeting adjourned.